Dear audience, good afternoon and Ramadan Kareem. I'm Sadia Shokat. I welcome to all of you in the third episode of the webinar for the month of April. This episode is about the pedagogy in a pandemic, international teacher education via distance learning through the time of COVID-19. Dear audience, I hope you will respect the protocols of the webinar. Please use the chat box for your questions and the comments. This webinar is presented and recorded through live stream that you can find through the sources of social media of University of Education. Dear audience, I'm delighted to introduce you with Dr. Elizabeth Hidson. Very warm welcome, Dr. Elizabeth. She is a senior lecturer in education, University of Sunderland, UK. She has worked on specialist school program being part of strategic project, and she has advanced skills being a teacher and a lead practitioner. She has mentored teachers at all stages of their career across London in primary and secondary schools. Currently, she is leading the postgraduate certification education program, working with school-centered initial teacher training partner in the North England, and she is a senior assistant program leader for the international postgraduate certification education. Let's begin our talk, and over to you, Dr. Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen and hopefully you will be able to see that nice and clearly. Can you just indicate if that's clear?
Yeah.
Lovely.
It's perfect. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sadia, for the invitation to come and speak today. I'm always happy to share my knowledge and experience with others and to learn from what other people have been doing. And one of the real benefits, I think, or opportunities coming from the pandemic in the last year is this increased opportunity to discuss and find out what other people are doing. And I work in international education, so I'm fascinated by what's happening all over the globe. And I think, it's a nice opportunity to be able to share with others, straight from somebody who's doing this sort of practice, what we are doing. And I've tried to structure this presentation to make it interesting for various people who might be watching. So today's talk, really, I'm looking at several key areas. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I came to work in the role that I do, because it's quite an unusual role, even though it is very much teacher training and education. I'm going to talk to you about the main job that I do, which is teaching teachers via distance learning. So essentially, I'm supporting teachers all over the world from my base in the UK and training them to teach and to be able to get their certification in education so that they have a recognised qualification that they can take around the world. But apart from that, in the last year, I have been helping to teach teachers to teach when both their teaching and learning has moved online, which is even more of a challenge, I think, beyond the fact that these trainees will usually be learning to teach online anyway. Now they're having to learn to actually teach themselves, teach their own students online. And the other area of interest from that is because it's a postgraduate certificate in education, it's halfway between a master's degree and an undergraduate degree. So half of the program they study at master's level. So they'll be doing 2 research-based master's degree modules that when they finish their teacher training, they could take forward and complete the rest of the credits required for a master's degree. So one of the challenges is to teach these trainee teachers to be research-informed practitioners and also researchers in their own right as practitioner researchers. And the challenge of doing that when we've done all of the move to the online world in the last year is also something that I think others will find quite interesting. And then finally, obviously, I'm a teacher educator, and I'm a researcher. So I'm looking for the opportunities to research these changes in practice. And that's very exciting work that I think has been a real opportunity over the last year. So I've split up the presentation into 4 sort of areas around these themes and sort of ending on that research where I bring all of that together. So I'll be happy if there are questions at the end or whatever to answer about anything that we do, teacher training, research, etc. I'll be happy to have those conversations. So a little bit, although thank you, Sadia, for the introduction, a little bit about me, just so that you know who I am and where I am. For me, it's just after 10 a.m. in the UK. For you, it's the afternoon. I work for the University of Sunderland, which is in the northeast of England. It's a very, I suppose, quieter, more semi-rural part of the world, although Sunderland itself is a city by the sea. That's my campus, although with the pandemic, I'm not working from campus, I'm working from my home, as with many educators and academics. Everybody knows where London is, and I used to live in London, I worked in London, etc. But I made the move to the northeast because there are 5 universities up here in the northeast, and there's a lot of teacher education to be done here in the northeast. So that's the Sir Tom Cowie campus on the coast here in the northeast, which is always a little bit colder than everywhere else in the UK, but very, very beautiful and very, very historic, just near Scotland, but not quite that far north. And I am a senior lecturer in education. My background is in schools, so I trained as a teacher of information technology. I worked for 14 years in London secondary schools, from a teacher of information technology through to head of department, an advanced skills teacher, a lead practitioner. I became an assistant head teacher, and then I moved up to deputy head teacher. So my last school job was as a deputy head teacher in a girls' school in London. And through all of those years, I was interested not only in my subject area, but also in teacher education and also in sort of the wider things, why we do what we do. And one of the reasons I suppose I stepped out of school to come to academia is because I had lots of questions and I wanted to know, why do we do what we do? And more importantly, how can we do that differently or better? And so I'm very interested in the idea of pedagogic research, and that really shapes who I am as a teacher educator, as well as a teacher and as a researcher. So on the back of that, while I was doing my doctorate, I got very involved in wider subject areas such as the Technology, Pedagogy and Education Association, which used to be known as the Association for IT in Teacher Education. They changed their name recently. But we publish the journal Technology, Pedagogy and Education, looking at how technology works and impacts on teacher education. So I'm very proud to be part of that. I'm a committee member for that organisation, and I have access to an awful lot of really excellent thinkers around educational technology and education and pedagogy, all the things that I love, all rolled into one organisation. So heartily recommend them to you if you haven't heard them. And the journal is a very good journal. I also review for their journal, so I get to read lots of fascinating papers covering those subjects. When I was studying for my doctorate, I was also working as a research associate at another university, at Newcastle University. And because of my interest in education, technology and pedagogy, a lot of the projects I worked on brought those things together. So I worked for the VO Europa project, which is video enhanced lesson observation, used with a number of partners across Europe. I worked with Professor Sugata Mitra on the self-organized learning, EuroSoul, which was a project looking at how self-organized learning can support children experiencing the risk of early school leaving school before they should and without their qualifications. I worked on the Lingua Cuisine project with Professor Paul Seedhouse, who's a linguist, looking at mobile, an app for learning languages and cooking and sharing culture through sort of social and language and technology. That's fascinating. I worked on the ProPIC Europa project, which was mobile apps for teacher education. And that was really where I started to get interested in blended and distance learning. Of course, I've mentioned the TPEA and the sort of the very profound impact that organisation has had on my thinking. But of course, I've been involved in research now across Durham University, where I was doing my doctorate, Newcastle University, and also my current university, University of Sunderland. I do have a really good research partnership with colleagues in Ulster University, Dr. Priyank Shukla, who looks at bioinformatics and teaching undergraduates about personalised medicine. And we've been looking at the impact of ways to teaching programming to reduce the stress and anxiety experienced by non-specialists who might be joining the world of bioinformatics and looking at how programming needs to shape some of their thinking. So it's a very rich and diverse and fascinating link between education, technology, and pedagogy all the way around. And that will probably tell you a bit about me and how I approach things. So I said I would start by talking about teaching teachers online, which is my day job. So I work for the International and Independent Distance Learning team here at the University of Sunderland, and we lovingly call ourselves Team IIDL to differentiate ourselves from the on-campus provision, where students come to campus, they get their training at the university, and then they go out into schools. We've moved the university element completely online so that we teach all of the academic and the subject studies online. They still go into their schools and they have mentors in schools and they have in-country tutors who go and visit them, but essentially they do their teacher training online. We are everywhere in the world. We have just short of about 1,000 students a year. Our biggest location, well, anywhere where there will be usually an international school or a British international school is where we tend to have trainees. We have a large contingent in Hong Kong and China because that side of the world has a real interest in British education, very strong in the Middle East, and then a few here and there across almost everywhere else in the world. One year I had a cohort that I was responsible for, and we had trainees everywhere from Australia to Zimbabwe, so A to Z, and I use that quite jokingly quite a lot. But it is fascinating to actually see how education works in various parts of the world. They can be teaching any kind of curriculum, so International Baccalaureate is very popular, the British education system is sort of exported everywhere, the American education system, and then variations of that. You might have a Swedish international school based perhaps in Germany, or you might have a Montessori school in Italy, or you might have a British school in sovereign territory, perhaps for one of the Ministry of Defence schools somewhere in the world. So you can see that anywhere where there might be the need for internationally focused education, very often they will employ teachers who are specialists, but perhaps who do not have a certificate or a qualification in teaching, and that's when they come to us. And those trainees can be very, very diverse. It can be completely brand new teachers who have never taught before who are joining the profession, or it can be these graduate in-service school staff, perhaps working as co-teachers or teaching assistants or special PE specialists, something like that, but they don't have the certificate. It can be completely very experienced teachers, again, who just need the certificate, and perhaps they see it as an opportunity for professional development and developing the language of education and pedagogy. Sometimes it's international school leaders who have risen very high in their profession, but perhaps feel that although they have many other qualifications, for them, they feel that a postgraduate certificate is a marker of something and that they were respected in their field. And then another group of teachers we work with are those specialist teachers of English language who are required anywhere where there is an English-speaking curriculum. So, for example, in Hong Kong, they have NET teachers, native English teachers, who are employed to teach English in the schools, and we work with those teachers. There are those kinds of programs everywhere in the world, and so we're happy to support those. So those are the kind of people who work with us. Our program is based on 4 modules. So we have a teacher training, actual practicum-based practical teaching module, where they go out and they are doing their daily teaching, their practice. We have a subject studies module where they think about the pedagogy of their subject and how they're teaching. And then we have the 2 research-based modules, which are the ones that I'm most heavily involved with. And we have a case study module where we get them to look at what the school is doing to support children who might have additional needs. Sometimes that's special educational needs and disabilities. Sometimes that might be that they are gifted children. It might be that they are children who are struggling with reading or writing or language. Very often children who are bilingual or multilingual will be struggling to develop their English language, and therefore they would need additional support with that. So we ask the teacher trainees to look at what the school is doing, compare that to practice, and to evaluate an intervention in a school setting. And then the other side of the research kind of coin, if you would, is we ask them to do some research on their own teaching. We ask them to use action research or practitioner inquiry to decide on a topic, to research what the literature says about what will work well in their age range and their subject area. They carry out that action research over a number of cycles, and they do an evaluative report of that. And I think it's a very nicely integrated program. It gives a little bit of everything that you would need, and it can be done anywhere in the world. So these are the fascinating sort of people that I work with. But of course, although we teach online, the trainees come to us for their subject studies, for their research training, and they submit their work online. That's been the easy part for them because they have chosen that way of learning. What hasn't been so easy in the last year, as with everybody in the world, has been moving to teaching online for them as they are also learning to teach partly online with us. And I think it's that element of practice that will be interesting to share how we have experienced that and how we have approached that. So as I said, we're everywhere in the world, but there is incredible variability everywhere in the world. You might have the situation where, for example, in Hong Kong, they have moved very much to a hybrid state of education where some children will be at home, some children will be in the classroom, and the teacher is juggling the ones who are in front of them with the ones who are online, and then trying to kind of manage that. And that can be made more difficult depending on the types of technologies that the school already had, the types of training perhaps that the school will have put in place so that the trainees can use that technology, and also whether the children and the parents have access to the same levels of technology. And that has been working quite well somewhere in the world like Hong Kong. It has been working well somewhere in the world like the Middle East, where a lot of the schools have been completely closed, and so the teaching has moved fully online. One of the other things that I do is I'm part of the assessment-only route to QTS. So that's the British teacher registration, if you like, so that you can come back and teach in the UK. So one of the things that I was doing a couple of weeks ago was I was doing lesson observation and interviewing for a candidate in Saudi Arabia. And his teaching has been completely online for the last year. And that's working variably well. Some of the issues there around assessment, about knowing how much the parents perhaps might be helping the children, etc., causing those sorts of issues that all teachers are worried about at all times. And then there might be parts of the world where a lot of the education has remained face-to-face. For example, one of my trainees in Africa, they don't do the online learning, they were still having face-to-face training, face-to-face teaching, and that's been how they've been managing that in a safe way, given social distancing measures, etc., has been something that those trainees have had to worry about. And so anything and everything from completely normally face-to-face to completely online is what our teachers have been having to deal with over the last year, and we've had to help them kind of support that really over the last year. So it's been very similar in parts of the world to the way we have experienced things in the UK. One of the things that the UK has done is allowed online teaching practicums where our UK-based teacher trainees have been able to join and do remote practicums, sit in on lessons with other teachers, teach online. But in some parts of the world, that's absolutely not allowed for teacher registration. So, for example, in Hong Kong, they don't count any online teaching for the teacher registration process. So candidates in Hong Kong have had to sit and maybe perhaps continue teaching if they were employed, but knowing that they are not allowed to actually register as a teacher until they're able to get back into the classroom. So that's had a number of challenges, I think, for the trainees. And of course, we work everywhere in the world, so the different challenges and the changing different challenges have been something that our candidates have been experiencing. I've mentioned some of the examples there. We've tried to be flexible in terms of how we do assignments, how we approach workload, different sorts of assessment pathways opening up, allowing a different way to show that the same learning objectives are being met. And I think we've done that very well. I'll be talking about that. But on the upside, I think education has had this injection, pardon the pun, given the sort of vaccination situation, but a real injection of educational technology into the process in the last year. It's not a case of whether you want to or you believe in educational technology or the use of technology in the classroom. It's a case of everybody pretty much has had to adapt. And that has meant a rapid upskilling of teachers' skills, knowledge, and understanding. But of course, this widespread adoption doesn't necessarily come with an immediate knowledge of what works. Our students have had to get it wrong as many times as get it right. And I think that's part of the pedagogical reasoning process, if you like. And if you think of somebody like Schulman and the pedagogical reasoning process, you're always trying to plan for good learning. You throw technology into the mix, it's still planning for good learning. And what we have not tried to do is teach our trainees all the right buttons to press. Rather, we've devolved that to the schools because we don't know what's in every single school. But we've tried to encourage them to think about the pedagogy before the technology. And I think that is working quite well. And that's a nice link to my next point, that we have been trying to encourage not just us as a university responding, but also remembering we're trying to encourage to practice what we preach, if you like, that the trainees are also developing this idea of pedagogy before technology. So the levels of interactivity and engagement that you would expect face-to-face. So perhaps rather than hands up or little quizzes in the classroom, quizzes online, the use of polls and forms to be able to do, what you might have done in the classroom as a starter activity, for example. The use of digital calendaring has been something that I have found particularly beneficial working in the international sector, where your calendar will automatically change to the time zone of the other person and they can book meetings with you. So maintaining that level, in fact, increasing that level of interactivity with our trainees, as the university has also brought on new technologies. So we've had a rapid kind of investment that was already underway, thankfully, and was happening before everything happened with the pandemic. But we've been able to kind of jumpstart how quickly we've embraced that. And I think we won't be looking back for some of that. Some of these new technologies that the university has invested in have really changed the way that we do things. I said to Sadia at the beginning that I don't use Google Meet because the university uses Microsoft Teams. So the way that we use Microsoft Teams, as they're also always changing, now being able to do things like recordings and breakout rooms and captions, and being able to use that for a process of paired live teaching, where perhaps I might be presenting, but somebody is managing the chat, exactly in the sorts of, the ways that we are now doing these professional webinars, bringing those into the classroom and into the virtual classroom, and being able to use that technology to try and enhance the way that we teach and we encourage the students to learn. We, of course, as with many people, have digital teaching and learning leads who then support with professional development of our university lecturers to help them to be able to stay at least one step ahead of the trainees and always be in a position of having something useful to share. Another thing I think we focus very much on is the idea of good instructional design and accessibility, the ideas of universal design for learning. If anybody's come across the work of Professor Diana Lorillard at the Institute of Education in London, her ideas of instructional design and the science of planning learning, that underpins the way our university looks at planning the learning activities that our trainees are taking part in. And the other thing we always have to be aware of is that our trainees are everywhere in the world. They have to be teaching in the English medium. And for the trainees, as much as the children, we have to recognize that the people who join our programs are also multilingual and incredibly talented, but that they have to learn to communicate in a teaching and learning sense and in an academic English sense. So our support for trainees who have English as an additional, another language, also has to make sure that we have the right kinds of technology. So captions, transcripts, podcasts, videos, the materials, so that as we incorporate that into our teaching, the students also recognize the effective practices and they incorporate that into their teaching. So simple things like taking a video, such as the classroom experiment video by Dylan William, who is a formative assessment specialist, and making our systems do interesting things with them. So in this example that's on the screen, my colleague took that video, which is maybe 1 hour long, and rather than asking the students go and watch that video and come back, she has incorporated quiz questions, and you can see at 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, stopping, pausing, asking a little quiz question, and then they have to answer the question to be able to move on. So really squeezing as much interactivity and engagement and benefit from a learning activity as possible. And we use a lot of visuals in our teaching, online teaching, because you are the audience there. You're perhaps not getting the same kind of level of eye contact and individualized attention as you would get if we were in the same seminar room, but certainly we can try our best to make sure that the visuals, the audio, etc., is all as good as it can be. And I think some of those are just about more creative thinking, bringing together my beloved ideas of technology, pedagogy, and education. Another thing that we do is a little bit like what we've got going on now, is the live sessions where we invite students to come along, a bit like a webinar. We do a little bit of input and then we talk about what's going on. Now, I do one for the case study module called Elizabeth's Case Study Coffee Shop, and that's me drinking my coffee in the case study. But to encourage them to come and sit and talk. And I say to them, imagine it was after a lecture and you were going to come and have a chat with me. Come and have a chat. Tell me about your problems and queries. I happen to love coffee, so I look at a coffee shop. My colleague likes tea, so he calls his the tea room. But we all have those sorts of things in our modules, and our tutors have weekly sessions where they have meetings with the students to do the same sort of thing. We've been trying to share our practice more widely. This is our newsletter that we produce 2 or 3 times a year for our own, so for our trainees, our mentors, our staff, people who work with us, telling them a little bit about the exciting things that we're doing, not just in terms of the practical things, but also about the sort of research that we're taking part in, that we're doing. So I will write about things that I'm doing. We'll talk about mentoring, etc. So a wide range of things that we share. I'll just move that on. So another one of the complexities there then is teaching teachers to do research when their teaching has moved online. So we ask them, particularly the case study module that I run, we ask them to look at the school, we ask them to find out what kind of interventions are running to support children who have additional needs, that wide range of needs that children can have, and then to be able to apply case study research design to their study, to select the appropriate research methods, and to be able to compare that to the literature that they review to understand how, for example, what are the best ways to support children with dyslexia, or to support children who are brand new to learning English, for example. So we tell them that's about an academic story. But of course, underpinning that are the practitioner inquiry and expected academic standards at master's degree level. So we've been teaching them how to look at online research methods, because research is a big, messy, complicated area. We all know that real world research goes wrong as often as it goes right. But as long as you have the tools to be able to carry that out, so you know the heritage of the methodology that you're using, you know how well justified the research methods that you're selecting are, we get them to start to think about how they can build on that knowledge. And for example, rather than doing face-to-face interviews, could they do an online interview? Rather than doing a lesson observation sitting at the back of the room making notes, but they can sit in and do the same thing on an online lesson, rather than picking up pieces of paper or looking at what the children are doing, taking photos of the work that they might be doing in the online space, or sharing digital documents, and how they can handle that kind of data in their research. And that's been working very well. And we sort of combine those areas of interest, the the moving research methods online, but also talking about them in our coffee shop each week. And I recently, myself and my colleague, published in the editor's notebook of the International Journal of Social Research Methodology to share how we've been doing that. And I am aware that I think you had Nadia Siddiqui as one of your speakers a while back. So I'm very conscious that one of the quotes on the right-hand side there is from a paper that Nadia and my friend Lindsay wrote for the British Educational Research Association recently about developing research capacity in trainee teachers. And I thought that was a really excellent short piece. And so I get all of my trainees to read that article. But I also say that it's not enough to be consumers. It's actually about being able to develop your own research skills as a practitioner. And I believe that underpins how we approach teaching. Because, of course, we are research active educators. We research into technology, pedagogy, education, and we want our trainees to do the same. But really based around that idea of communities of practice, so going back as far as Leuven Wenger, that we are inculcating trainee teachers into the world of education. So they join us as teachers, they join us as educators, but they also join us as researchers, as practitioner researchers. And I think that's a very important thing, that we give them that sense that that is welcomed and embraced and valued in our profession. Whereas often there's been an issue between practice and research, and that the two things don't meet. But actually, in something like education, how could they not meet, is my opinion. So bringing our trainees into this sense of community, I believe, is one of the most important things that we do. And then off the back of that, I suppose, is the next level. I'm a researcher, as well as a teacher teacher educator. And this opportunity to change assessment practices has been really very valuable, because it has meant that my background in educational technology and pedagogy has really become so much more important in the last year or so. I was already somebody who was playing around the edges of using online things, by using Skype for interviewing, for doing different things like that years before. And I shared some of my work, and I've published some stuff recently about that, because when I was researching, I was very much on my own. Now everybody's interested in how you do research online, and perhaps what the benefits and affordances of that technology and that approach might be. So bringing that perspective into distance learning, which also has the technology and the pedagogy, in a pandemic situation, has actually, rather than being, yes, it has been very difficult, very challenging, and in some cases, very problematic, but also to look at the opportunities. And I think that's kind of where I'm coming from in this next section. Now, as I said, when I started to do my doctoral research and realized that because of my information technology, computing background, that I was teaching computing to children, working with teachers who were equally confident and happy to play with technology. They love technology, but that not everybody was like that. So that when it seemed sensible to me as a doctoral researcher to bring those things together, I found, as I said, I very much felt like I was alone. And I found others who were writing in that area, but not so many back around that sort of time. This was 2014, 2015, 2016. Susie Weller, working for the National Centre for Research Methods, used Skype for qualitative longitudinal interviews. And she described it as being at a methodological frontier. And of course, the thing about frontiers is you're out there on your own, you're lonely. Now I think a lot more people have come to that frontier and gone beyond, and we've been able to grow this idea of digital and visual research methods. And I'm very much a sort of a proponent of those approaches, but of course I justify them because of my background in technology, pedagogy, education. And I think that's a sort of a very fascinating place to be working. So one of the things that we have been doing because of the online learning is about rethinking assessment. Now, for us, the trainees have to put together a portfolio of evidence that they are working towards the British Teachers Standards of 2011. They've been the same since 2011. And those teacher standards, I mean, literally, I have them beside me at all times. This is my one-page diagram of the British Teacher Standards. But that's around high expectations. It's about progress and outcomes, subject knowledge, planning lessons, differentiation, adapting lessons for the needs of children, assessment, behaviour management, and then wider professional responsibilities. Now, when I did my postgraduate certificate in education back in 1999, that was big folders, like literally double and triple the size of the usual ones, filled to the brim with pieces of paper that I printed and annotated and highlighted and put sticky notes in. Teaching the same sort of program online has necessitated that we can't do that. We can't have people posting us their folders. So digital portfolios have become a way that we had worked in our assessment of that. But then we pushed that a little bit more. We thought that actually, if we were to talk to the students about what they were doing, then perhaps we would get a better sense of how they were doing. And of course, doctoral trainees, postgraduates who have viva voce examinations, the viva, will know about how we do oral examinations. There are industries such as health where that kind of viva works very well to make sure that quickly people are able to talk about practice. So we've been using dialogic assessment quite a lot, and that's been very, very useful. But we've tried to even push that a little bit further. One of the things from my background that I have a strong belief in is the use of video-enhanced observation, which I've mentioned. I've been involved in research projects about that. So when the university brought in Panopto, which is a lecture capture video technology, we used that and thought, hang on, how can we make that suit our needs? So getting students to, with permission of course, let's not ignore the ethics, and that's a very large part of it, submit videos of their lessons for us to do video-enhanced lesson observation on. And if you're interested in that, I've written quite a bit about video-enhanced lesson observation. If you Google me, you'll find some of my stuff. But of course, if they submit to the university technology, it's protected, it's tracked against the student ID, only the teacher and the student can read it. Staff can then observe the lesson, they can make notes, they can upload the feedback, etc. That's all backed up, and it's a time-saving thing. In the international sector, although we do have in-country tutors who visit the trainees where there are groups of trainees, very often in other parts of the world we don't have those, and so we do have to rely on video-enhanced observation. And I see that as a real strength, because the dialogue between the teacher and the observer becomes even more powerful when you can play the video and say, look at this, look at that. Let's discuss what you were thinking when you were doing that thing in the classroom. And one of the things that I've worked on is getting our university's information governance department to look at what we're doing, quality assure our processes for ethics and for data handling. And we have a document that we share with all head teachers who approve for their trainees to join our program, so that they know exactly what they need to share with their parents about how video is used in teacher training and professional development in their schools. So for those of you who might be worrying about ethics with video, yes, you're absolutely right. And yes, we have sort of looked at that. So this is an example of a screen where students would have submitted their video. I've blurred that slightly. So I can sit there as an observer, I can play the video, I can pause it, I can make my notes, I can upload my feedback. And that's very, very powerful. And then, of course, I can meet with my trainee and talk about what I've seen, do the same thing with them. And that becomes a really powerful learning experience. And that's off the back of my research interest in video-stimulated interviewing. So if you're interested in that, I've done some writing about that, but look out for VSRRD, Video-Stimulated Recall, Reflection and Dialogue. Melanie Nind at the University of Southampton National Centre for Research Methods, been working in that field far, far longer than I have. But really trying to theorize that as a way of carrying out assessment or indeed research, because I've done it for both now. This is a little model that I put together to try and explain to fellow academics and practitioners about how this works. So, it's always useful to have these sorts of models to explain your thinking. So you've got the researcher and the participant, so whether that's the student and the observer or the researcher and the participant, and how that's sharing in terms of either think aloud processes where the participant is talking and the observer, the researcher, is listening, or where there's a shared dialogue and something is being created from the dialogue. And that's not just dialogue in the layperson's idea of a chat. It's about constructive building of new things in that dialogic space. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on, because that's kind of the culmination of this kind of year of work. That's a paper that I wrote about internet video calling and desktop sharing as an emerging research method for exploring pedagogical reasoning in lesson planning, which was some of the stuff that I was doing from my doctorate. So if you're interested, that's a paper that I've kind of used in a number of ways, because I do have this real interest in digital and visual methods. So with this idea of bringing together video and dialogic assessment, my team got an award for innovation, and we have been given funding to look at video enhanced dialogic assessment as a project over this last year. So we're presenting that at the Assessment in Higher Education Network. We're presenting that at BERA this year. We're also sharing that at the Australian, I forget the acronym, ASCILITE, but it's literally Australian interests in sort of IT in education sort of thing. But, the idea really, and the silly diagram in the middle, was when I was trying to explain what we were doing to the ethics committee here, I thought, think of it as a Viva, where you've got the student, you've got the observers, and really they've got the evidence, we've got the teacher standards, we know what we're looking for, they know what they've done, and somewhere in the middle, in that dialogic space, is where either they know and are able to talk about what they're doing in a way that is convincing, or we can prompt them to try and get them to the point where they realize what we're asking, and then we can sort of construct this new piece of evidence or not. If they haven't got the skill, they haven't got the skill, they won't be able to talk about it. We're not going to spoon feed it to them, obviously. We're there to assess them. But if I think if you look at that as an opportunity to draw together all of that kind of, disciplinary language, the language of teaching and learning, the language of standards, the language of experience, and try to share examples of what that looks like in this dialogic space, then that's what we're really researching this year. We're not really looking at how good is the technology. We're not really looking at how good are the questions. We're looking at how good is that thing that is created in this dialogic space? What happens there? And I think that's quite high level thinking, and perhaps quite different to the way that people might usually approach assessing a portfolio of evidence. We're doing it online with assessors, with trainees, with their live evidence, knowing that actually part of this is bringing them into this community of practice. And I'm very excited by the opportunities that this is going to bring. So bringing that back together, Sadia told me I could have about 45 minutes to talk, so I'll just sort of bring that up into these final sorts of takeaways from today. Really, I think it's no matter what you're doing, when you're doing it, what kind of pandemic or not situation, look for the opportunities that challenges offer for practice. We're always going to learn something. As educators, we're learning all the time. We're doing that practitioner inquiry all of the time. Build on what we know about good teaching and learning. There will always be a literature base. Somebody will always in our profession have written and researched about it, and we can use our academic skills to find the debates, the challenges, the gaps, the niche areas, bringing together good teaching and learning, good technology, good research, and contributing to the knowledge. And also to not be afraid that sometimes things can be done even better because we've had the chance to suddenly look at them differently. That, as a profession, we have to change and adapt, and that sometimes that means that we don't always do things the way we're used to doing, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. So concluding then that we're turning these problems and their solutions, because of course we're having to find solutions, into something worthy of further research and dissemination. And I think that's probably my key takeaway from the last year, is that all of those things have been true, and I now have a new and more interesting platform for research moving ahead based on the experiences of this year. So thank you very much for your patience. I hope it's been interesting to you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Elizabeth. Dear audience, if you have your question, just write it in the chat box, or you can ask directly to Dr. Elizabeth. If you have your question, just let me know. Okay, meanwhile, I have a question, Dr. Elizabeth. So what are the effective digital resources to use while teaching students online?
Well, we've obviously in part limited to what the university provides, and to make sure that there's a consistent level of provision. So we are using Panopto for video, we're using Microsoft Teams for the interactive elements, we're using a digital portfolio space for them to be able to upload their materials. Behind that, there are lots of free things that you can use. So we use Canva, C-A-N-V-A, for lots of the design aspects to make things look more appealing. So we have little digital visual signposts for things as we're going through. Padlet, there's a very good whiteboard, whiteboard.fi for free sort of whiteboards that people can use. And we're always sharing these kinds of resources because we work with everybody from early years practitioners right through to further education and higher education. We're sharing all sorts of resources all the time that can be used for different things. And our students are very good at showing us proudly what new thing they found to be able to do different things. Quite a variety, really.
Yeah. And what about the new transformation in the teaching pedagogy, such as we have ETVs? So did you design such type of any ETVs instead of the activities, because it's very much digital now? So
did you say ETV? Was that an acronym? ETV?
Yeah, ETVs.
ETVs? Like interactive whiteboards, that kind of thing? Or
I mean, in the physical teaching setting, we have activities, but when we deal students to the distance learning, we have EVTs.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. E-activities, got you. Yes, it's similar sorts of things. We're looking at what can be turned into digital experiences. So where perhaps we might have had a starter, teaching them how to use starter activities, turning that starter activity into something like, welcome to the lesson, please post a screenshot in the chat, or respond to this prompt or this tool. One of the things that I've been quite good at seeing in teachers' practices have been the ways that they've taken things that we would teach them to do in the offline space, so for example the lesson starters, and bringing those online, so having sort of a big question or a do now activity on the screen, and how we can get them to work with those. And we've been promoting through the use of things like that classroom experiment video, and how you can take videos and do more interesting things with them, so that they teach children to have time away from the computer as well as back at the computer and doing different things. So for example, go and do an offline activity, take a photograph of it, bring it back, paste it in. So, it's really about creatively approaching what you think is going to achieve the learning objective, and taking the technologies that they have at their disposal to be able to bring that into the online space. So it's that kind of, pedagogy, all of the time thinking about what do we want them to learn, how best can they learn this through whether that's offline or online technologies. And we've encouraged them to read what people are writing about how best to work in the online space. So, for example, Doug Limov and Teach Like a Champion, he recently took that onto the online classroom. So we've been encouraging him to do things like keep it quite familiar, be consistent, and for example, even simple things like keeping your presentation formats quite similar so that you are not distracting children with kind of cognitive overload, but helping them to maintain their skills with things like retrieval and recall, and trying out different ways to, explain and share content, giving them opportunities for guided practice. So whether that guided practice takes place in a Microsoft Teams breakout room, because a teacher is going to work with a small group of students, or whether, a teacher is going to work with a student one-to-one. Planning for those levels of interaction, planning for the independent practice, planning for feedback and explanations, and trying to get to a position where you dissolve the screen, that it's not about, oh, my teacher is on the screen. My teacher is with me, and they don't see the screen anymore. And I think that's probably, one of our key approaches to teaching in the online space, is that you forget it's being mediated by and through and with technology, that it becomes about what it should be about, the learning.
Yeah. And regarding assessing students' performance, what are the effective assessment techniques that we can use through distance learning?
I mean, again, from the technology perspective, that's going to be very much dependent on what's available. So, we have some quite low stakes quizzing and polling and sharing, etc. We have mechanisms that can track interactions, how long children have spent doing things. We can turn exams and things online if we have to. So it's a case of thinking through what it is you're trying to assess and how best that's going to be assessed. So for somebody who loves technology, you're probably quite surprised at how much I push the pedagogy, because I genuinely believe that it is about that. And of course, when we think about how we're going to give feedback, determining when, how, and where those assessment points are going to come, for our trainee teachers, getting them to think about it, but also for us as, on our online teaching course, but making sure that it's accessible. So rubrics, quizzes, model answers, good success criteria, so that children and other learners know exactly what you're asking them to do. Because, of course, what we need to do as teachers is to identify the misconceptions and the errors, diagnose, and then resolve that, fix that, help the children to learn. I think that's, in the haste to use technology, to not forget that really that's what we're there for. It's not about the buttons and the bells and the whistles, it's about the learning. And I think something like online learning really brings that home, because if you're just there and presenting and it's a very passive experience and you're not doing anything, then that's not really education, is it? You need people to be engaged. And I suppose finding the technology ways, dependent on your school or your institution and their provision and what's freely available out there, is part and parcel of what we're trying to achieve sort of all of the time, I think.
I have a last question regarding the practicum of the students. During the pandemic, now the schools are closed and we are not sending the pre-service teachers to the schools for their practicum. So how you are dealing, this practice for the pre-service teachers? So do you, have you created any digital placement platforms for the students' practicum, and how are you dealing with this phenomenon?
In the UK, that's more common. Our dean has been very involved with the Department for Education and the idea of the virtual placement, so that the students are connected to a school, they become a member of staff at the school, they join, they may do paired teaching, co-teaching, while they're part of that placement, if you like. But we've also, in some parts of the world, got students who have not been able to get into placement for whatever reason. So schools are not accepting them yet as trainees. So we've kind of created, and our early years people particularly, because it's very difficult to do online learning with little ones, 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, that kind of engagement is quite difficult. So we have put together a sort of virtual placement experience where we have access to an organisation that does lots and lots of observations of children in settings. And so we've got them using those video clips as observational opportunities and setting them tasks around observing different kinds of activities, how they would plan for those students. So using that kind of virtual experience to develop their practicum skills, even though they're not in the placement. So they're not wasting their time. They're applying them to students that they can see, and they can see what's going on. They can plan lessons for them, they can observe what's going on, they can see what's happening, they can discuss with other trainees, and that at least gives them some measure of experience, as if they were actually in a placement school and sitting and observing lessons. It's not perfect, it's not ideal, but it's not nothing. It is something valuable. Those observational skills are really key, I think. You know, getting underneath what's going on in the classroom is what we want for all of our trainees.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I got a new idea through the virtual placement and how to create it in collaboration with a school. That's really encouraging and appreciative. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Elizabeth, on behalf of University of Education. Thank you for accepting my invitation, conducting a very nice session on online learning resources and that are effective to engage students during distance learning. Thank you for sharing the valuable information about the digital teaching resources to use while teaching and learning to make difference in students' learning who really show low motivation during virtual setting. Thank you once again.
Thank you very, very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you and bye.